Good morning. That was a superb opening. It's clearly set the tone for the rest of the day. Let us hope so. Is Denise still with us? Because I would like to say something politically incorrect to start with, that a lot of us men like women with sexy voices, so she had no need to apologize. But it reminded me of a scene Pavarotti was doing a Q&A in New York. And he had everything very serious about singing and music and so on. And then an elderly lady at the back got up and she said, "Mr. Pavarotti, I would just like to tell you that a lot of us women like big men with deep voices." And she sat down. And I think I'm also suffering from a cold in a visit of Oslo. But I wanted to see if I could do a little scene setting this morning. It's very difficult because we've had a very specific set of stories to complement that, so I've been able to cut out a few things. But I want to begin by making a point that has led me into the work on the Precariat, was the essential need to make a distinction between work and labor. Every age has had its stupidity about what is work and what is not work. Ours is the most stupid, okay? Because all work that is not labor disappears from our statistics, disappears from our textbooks, and disappears from political rhetoric. But one of the extraordinary things about this technological revolution is taking place is that I think you will find, and we need historians to test this hypothesis, that this is the first technological revolution which is generating more work than labor. Okay, I could elaborate on that, but I won't. The second contextual point I want to make is that you can really see the evolution of capitalism as going through three time regimes, if you like. I don't like the term regime. An agrarian time regime, when work and labor and other activities were essentially dominated by the seasons, the weather, and so on. So you weren't dominated by many of the considerations of today. Then you go into an industrial time regime where life and labor and work were in blocks. Got up in the morning, you went to the workplace, you clocked in, you clocked out, went home, had a bit of sex, went to sleep. Blocks, okay? It's ditto with life. A few years of schooling if you were lucky, 30 years of labor if you're lucky, 2 years of retirement, drop dead. No, blocks. We are now in a tertiary time regime when all the activities tend to be blurred. We don't have easy boundaries between the activities that we do. And it's extremely difficult because our labor statistics are completely unfit for purpose. They're a disgrace, okay? So we still find newspapers and articles and books and things using those old labor statistics as if they're telling us the truth about how we are spending our time. And I think that that is a problem that we're facing because we don't have a good conceptualization yet of tertiary time, but it's an important thing. The third contextual point I want to make is an apology to Ned Ludd. Okay? We have a lot of talk about the Luddites and how technological unemployment is about to hit us. I was recently debating with Martin Ford, who's written a book he got the FT's Book of the Year. I don't know how he got it, but he got the Book of the Year award. And basically he's saying that robots are going to replace, all workers, etc. You know the thesis. And of course, the Bank of England's chief economist has said, we're facing the prospect of thing. And there's a well-known Oxford study, which I think is being misused, which is talking about 47% and all that. You know the stuff. Now, I think that's nice to quote a very famous man, who I'll just get the words right. "Within the very near future, much less than 25 years, we shall have the technical capacity of substituting machines for any and all human functions in organizations." Well, the man who made that remark was Herbert Simon in 1960. And he received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1978. Between 60 and 78, the world's employment had risen to a record level. And it's an even more record level today when we've had a lot more technological change. McKinsey has estimated that in the last decade an extra billion jobs have been generated in the global economy. So you're running against a well-known thesis about mass unemployment. And of course, many economists, I'm an economist, many of us say we refer to the lump of labor fallacy, and that there's not a fixed amount of work and labor to be done. But it's quite interesting that that debate is also going alongside sort of almost a reinvention of the Kondratiev long wave theory that was popular when I was a student. You know, that every 60 years ago there's a huge technological revolution which has product innovations plus process innovations, and that is thoroughly disruptive. Paul Mason takes that forward into post-capitalism, when we're all going to be free of any capitalist thinking. I think that's, I've told him that, I think it's a profoundly mistaken interpretation of what is happening, but it's part of the debate. And I think that the interesting parts about the technological change that have come up so far, and we've just had a very good expose of the first, is the technology coupled with other changes is making the location of production and employment infinitely flexible. So a major corporation will have 50 or 60 plants in different parts of the world, and at the margin it can change the division of labor and the structure of jobs according to costs and so on very easily. And the job structures are also increasingly fluid. Well, one of the things that is important in our debate is that as a result of various changes which I've discussed in the Precariat books, the firm itself has ceased to be a parameter. The firm has become a commodity subject to mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, retakeover, etc., and it is no longer a fixed entity. It's a commodity. Another aspect, of course, is that the trade in tasks is largely displacing the trade in finished goods and services. That is a well-known feature. And most importantly, in my view, is that this technological revolution is profoundly altering both the functional distribution of income and the personal distribution of income, and creating the basis of a rentier economy. I'm not sure, and I think this is an area for big research, whether the new technologies are replacing high-skilled or low-skilled jobs. We don't know, and then one of the problems is that statistics used for looking at de-skilling or upskilling or so on are again unfit for purpose. We use years of schooling as a proxy, which is very lousy. You can have a bumping down, so a lot of people with skills are displacing people who got the skills, but they don't have the formal schooling that is equal. So many of our statistics are not fit for purpose for that either. Now, the next point I want to make is that I think the combination of the technological revolution, the Silicon Revolution in particular, plus neoliberalism, which has captured the state and the global economy, has contributed to the class fragmentation that I've discussed in my recent books, and in particular, the growth of the Precariat. Now, you cited some case studies, and one of the things that, if you write a book on the Precariat in 2011, after that you get inundated with thousands of case studies by people who write to you and to want to tell you their particular experience from all over the world. It's extraordinary. I could write several books just on the emails I've received on people describing their experiences, and they correspond very much to the images that you were giving. I think the Precariat, very, very briefly, can be defined in terms of people being habituated to accept a life of unstable labor without an occupational narrative to give to their lives, or a corporate narrative, even if in practice they do stay in firms for quite a long time. more and more people don't expect to stay in those things, and that creates an existential insecurity. And very importantly, which is hardly given much attention by commentators on the precariat, is that people in the precariat have a very high ratio of work to labor. They have to do a lot of activities that they don't wish to do, but if they don't do it, they'll pay a heavy price in their labor and their incomes. So you get people having to apply online to thousands of jobs, not just dozens, thousands of jobs, and often going through layers and layers of processes. So there's a survey recently done, which I quoted, that the average MBA in Europe has to apply for 38 jobs and go through 6 layers of shortlisting before they get to the interview stage. So that's over 200 processes. And they have to fill in forms, they have to do aptitude tests, they have to do IQ tests, and of course that uses up a vast amount of time. Now, it's ridiculous to call it leisure. It's work, right? But we don't have statistics capturing that sort of phenomenon. If you're in the precariat, you have to retrain because your last lot of retraining was not good enough, it's obsolescent, blah, blah, blah. You have to use up a lot of time filling in forms, queuing, doing something for the state. It's a life of intensive work for labor and work for the state. Next aspect, of course, is that typically the person in the precariat has a level of education that is above the level of labor they're expected to perform. That didn't used to be the case, so millions of people experience that. And of course, people in the precariat, including all the taskers we're going to talk about, are having to rely almost entirely on money wages. And in a context in which globalization is leading to downward pressure on real wages in all industrialized countries. The figures are overwhelmingly about that story. And the last point I want to make is that people in the precariat, including all these, the people on digital labor, are losing all forms of rights. They're losing civil rights, cultural rights, they can't belong to a community. They're losing social rights, they don't get access to rights-based benefits. They're losing economic rights because they can't practice what they're qualified to practice. And they're losing political rights because they don't see a political agenda representing them, which is one of the biggest problems facing us at the moment. Now, in the context of the growth of the precariat, how have rentier platforms affected the outcome? The first thing I think to realize is that we're dealing with new labor brokers, a new form of labor brokers which are taking huge rents from their workers and from other people. And we've got a huge scale. Recently, Larry Michel, whom I know and respect, he dismissed digital platforms as saying they're not that big. Well, the statistics tell us something different. Uber is operating at the moment in 351 cities in 64 countries. It has 1.1 million drivers under contract, and it went from when it started in 2009 till now to become the fastest growing corporation in history. It's now valued at over 60 billion. Airbnb, which was set up 5 years ago, its 3 founder members who just reached the age of 30 have become billionaires in 5 or 6 years. They have 34,000 cities and towns they're operating in 190 countries. That's fantastic growth, okay? Amazon Turk, which was set up in 2005, has millions, and hundreds of other platforms are growing exponentially, extraordinarily fast. I like the one that Clickworker in Germany. We always think of American corporations, a few British, but Clickworker in Germany has over 7 700,000 click workers signed up and it operates in 136 countries. Now, these are extraordinarily fast growth. They may not yet amount to a total domination, but we're talking about a transformation that is really taking off. In Japan, the crowd work industry says they want to get to 10 million people signed up doing cloud worker by 2018, and there are plans to expand that to 20 million by 2023. Now, before we come to the taskers that I think we need to subdivide, let me talk about the business model that has particularly dominated Uber and a few other of these major platforms. Uber and others are funded almost entirely by venture capital, by private equity, and they deliberately stay private rather than going as public companies with shareholders and stock exchange. And the reason Uber does it is that it runs deliberately at a huge operating loss. It loses per quarter over $100 million, and 1 year recently it lost over $1 billion. Okay, now if you had a public shares, your shares would plummet. And the last year they Uber mobilized $9 billion from private equity. And most of the private equity that are funding, I'm using Uber as an example, but other companies are the same, is that the people putting up the funds, they demand that the company doesn't go public. Because they say, if we go public, the valuation is likely to drop, we will lose money, and therefore we would have to be compensated by you, Uber. Okay. Now, this allows Uber to do an extraordinary predatory pricing strategy. In China at the moment, which is Uber's biggest market, incidentally, Uber is locked in a battle, huge battle, with Didi Kuaidi, which is also a platform providing taxi services. Now, Uber has indulged in pricing where it's deliberately underpricing any local taxis wherever it goes, making a loss, driving the competition into the margins, and then putting up the price. But in addition, what they've been doing is they give their drivers bonuses in the initial phase when they're doing that. So the drivers get paid higher than the price that the drives sell for. And what's happened is that Uber is being backed by all these private equity people in California and New York. So Didi Kuaidi is now being backed by Chinese state enterprises and the biggest corporate backing outside. In India, Uber is locked in a battle with Ola Cabs. Again, Uber is doing this predatory pricing. Ola Cabs has responded by getting a Russian oligarch to lend them $1 billion or so. So we now have a situation where Uber and Ola both have about 250,000 drivers in India, operating in competition, and the pricing war will continue for some time to come. Now, this is a very distinctive model, and of course it spells a different type of capitalism. Now I want to come to the taskers. I think that it helps, and I may be wrong, you may think differently, but we're at an early stage of doing analysis of these issues, to subdivide the taskers, what I call taskers, into 3 categories. The first, I think, should be called the concierge economy, because all the people being hired to do personal services like lift your trolley or move around or some petty little thing. For this sort of service, the Rentier platforms take 20%. Uber takes 20%, Airbnb 9 to 15%, TaskRabbit takes 30% of the deal. So they're making huge rental incomes. Now, a big issue, of course, that has dominated the legal discussion, and we had brief mention of it at the end of the previous talk, is, are the taskers employees or self-employed, right? I personally think that they're neither, and the distinction is arbitrary, and that we need a new category. That's why I prefer the term taskers. Okay? Now, I just quote from TaskRabbit, if I can find it quickly. TaskRabbit has on its support center a big rhetorical question. Do taskers work for TaskRabbit? And it gives the answer. No, they do not. Taskers are local entrepreneurs and independent contractors who work for themselves. TaskRabbit simply provides the platform for clients and taskers to meet. We vet and background check all taskers before allowing them onto the platform to ensure that they are professional and reliable individuals. It's a standard line of these things. Now, I think this is thoroughly disingenuous. I think that you got to look very clearly at what is happening, because clearly the taskers in this situation own the means of production, main means of production. They own their car, their house, whatever, their tools or whatever it is, and they bear the costs and the risks in doing so. But at the same time, they are subject to directions, discipline, ratings, and the new thing, a word that we never had in the old labor economics textbooks, deactivation. You know, if you do a little thing wrong, or you don't have enough star ratings, if more than 4.5 stars out of 5 in the case of Ubers and others, then you can be deactivated. It sounds like a terminal sentence. And I rather liked Handy's quotation on this. Again, trying to defend what they do. Handy is a transparent platform that takes care of every need in the home. As part of this transparency, we offer a two-way rating system so independent professionals can offer feedback on how a job went, and customers can do likewise. This incentivizes excellence on both sides of the supply and demand equation, provides constructive feedback for professionals and customers, and opens up more lines of communication to ensure the best possible experience in the home. Well, I hope you can appreciate that this is an asymmetrical situation. If you, as a tasker, get a bad rating by a customer, you can be deactivated, okay? Imagine you're being in a traffic jam and the customer is annoyed because you're late. You suddenly get a 2-star rating, right? Or he doesn't like Muslim drivers. Get a 1-star rating. It's just completely open to abuse. It is a ridiculous situation, but they can pretend that it's a fair one. Now, I thought that at this point that somehow it made me think of the California judge who showed great learning for a judge in talking about Uber recently. And he quoted Michel Foucault. Not every judge can do that. And he said that ratings put people into a, quoting Foucault, a state of conscious and permanent visibility which assures the automatic function of power. I rather like that. Ratings are loaded. Now, everybody in this form of tasking, I believe, belongs to the precariat. They have no income security, no labor-related security, no occupational trajectory, high ratio of work to labor, etc. The second type of tasker is the taskers in cloud labor. Here we've had earlier discussions. This includes Amazon Turk, TaskRabbit, Upwork, and a lot of others. And it's going up the level of occupation. It was initially for very low-level type of activities. But it's gone all the way up, and so there's a nice term, virtualization of professional services. So legal, medical, all sorts of things are doing it. And the idea of these human intelligence tasks, HITs, that were briefly mentioned before, means that the typical tasker in this zone has to do thousands of tasks, paid a pittance each and every one, per year to make even a little money. But in addition, this Taylorism that is taking place, we have a situation where the power of the chief executives is extraordinary. And I want to quote one who must have had a couple of drinks before he said this, because you would have thought moment of hubris was not clever. This is the CEO of Crowd Flower. He said, before the internet, it would be really difficult to find someone, sit them down for 10 minutes, get them to work for you, and then fire them after 10 minutes. But with technology, you can actually find them, pay them that tiny amount, and then get rid of them as quickly as possible. I mean, that's a chief executive. I don't know how much whiskey he'd drunk, but clearly this sort of arrogance that is characteristic of the situation at the moment. Now, the development of this form, I'm just going back to my notes, the development of this form is clearly transforming labour and is going to have huge effects coming forward. The last one, the last category which I think should be kept separate is on-call employees, okay? Which, when I first wrote about zero-hour contracts back in 2009, people, I remember the publisher writing me, he said, what the hell's that? Now, of course, with Jill and others who've done fantastic work on the subject, we know a lot more about zero-hour contracts. But in the United States, for example, it's now reckoned that 15% of all employees are on-call or zero-hour type contracts. And they're doubly exploited because they have to be on call at almost all times. They're trapped by exclusivity, their deals and so on, and they have to do a hell of a lot of work for labor for which they don't get paid. That's the feature. Now, the next thing that I think is happening, which is really part of this bigger debate, is that part of the neoliberal strategy since the 1980s has been the systematic dismantling of occupational communities. All the guilds, the professions, the crafts was turned over from self-regulating, where you entered a community and you went through and learned the ethics and standards and so on, to the point where they've been state regulated. It's not deregulation, it's state regulation. Okay. Now, I think that part of it has been is being accelerated by the development of the digital economy. I've just got a sign saying time up, so I'm rushing into the next 2 points that I want to make. The next point, which is, I think, a fascinating area which we haven't yet to integrate into our perspective, or I haven't seen people do so, is that alongside automation, we have another phenomenon called heteromation. A heteromation is where people are being induced to have to do extra work that wasn't done. That is a huge area. Facebook's CEO recently boasted that Facebook now has the largest unpaid workforce in the world. And the amount of heteromation is that pushing us to do a lot of work that we are doing without being paid for it is extraordinary. Now, this leads to my last set of questions, which I've addressed in the Precariat Charter, so I'll be very, very quick. The chair will be glad to know, is what should be done? What should be done? I think there is a fascinating set of policy debates that are going to be coming up. The first point I want to make is there's no going back. Don't think we can start imagining that some of these processes should be reversed. But we need new regulations. And first of all, we need new statistics. Every time there's been a transformation in the labor process, there has been a revolution in the way statistics are being presented, and we still haven't had it. We need to put pressure on the authorities to invent new statistics. We need new forms of collective bargaining and new forms of collaborative bargaining between different groups. We need to make sure that the platforms pay for the social policies that they're undercutting, so there need to be levies on them, and we need codes of ethics for all these labour brokers. Now here, Oxford's Sage Business School has set ball rolling, and I salute them for that. We need codes of ethics and associations where all the brokers have to belong. We need to roll back the licensing nonsense. We need to roll back the Dutch auction processes that are still out there. When I first wrote an article on this, Amazon Turk wrote to me and said, yeah, we've abandoned Dutch auctions. But they're still doing it in a number of places in the world. We need to avoid exclusivity clauses. We need to make sure that all taskers have written contracts, witnessed contracts, so that they have the means of making a redress. And we need to curb all this customer ratings. We must have a campaign to stop these customer ratings. And I think the final points are that the state itself is going to have to intervene to encourage a better bargaining power equality in the process. Because at the moment, we have a situation which is completely asymmetrical, hugely powerful for these rentiers who are creaming off billions and billions out of this process. So there are a number of things that can be done, and I think the first point is that we're not going to see a reverse of what the trends are showing us. Thank you very much.